So today what I'm going to talk about, I think both Henry and Phil talked about the various standards. So some of the material will be a little bit redundant, and I'm not going to dwell on that. As Phil indicated, I co-chaired the AS6171. Dan DeMacy is actually the chair. He does most of the work. I just help him as much as I can. What you see up here is there are a lot of documents being worked on at SAE, and that just gives you a flavor of the various different documents that there are, the AS6171, 6496, 6301, and on and on. So this one chart just gives you a brief summary of what the various documents are and what these subcommittees are working on. What I also did was, just for the sake of abbreviation, to show you a summary of where the various documents are currently right now. The AS5553, obviously both Henry and Phil talked about that. The main point on this one is that they're revising it, and they're revising it to the point that they're going to connect it with other documents. One of the questions that has come up on both for 5553 and 6081 is how do we test? What are the test methodologies? Currently, they are not connected with any test document, but with the revision, with AS6171, which we hope to release in first quarter of 2014, then 5553 and 6081 will be able to point to that document. There are other counterfeit mitigation documents that are in the industry also. A lot of you know about IDEA 1010, and there are, Europe has some, there's some committees that are working on some of the documents, but they're really summarizing what's going on. There are some committees that are working on a promotional activity. But as far as the standards are concerned, the current standards, the SAE is taking the lead. All the new standards are, from what I know, are coming from SAE. And I won't dwell on the 5553. It's been talked about. 6081, Phil just talked about. 6496, I think there will be further discussion later on. And 6171, 6178 also. So this just shows you that how 6171 plays a role from 5553, 6174, 6081, 6496. All of them hopefully will point to 6171. So what is 6171? 6171 is basically a standard that we're developing that will outline the various tests that various companies can do to verify whether a part is counterfeit or not. And I use the word verify, not authenticate, because there's no way we can authenticate it. All we can do is we can run various tests, and I don't know what the surety level will be, sometimes maybe 20%, sometimes 90%, but there's no way to tell whether it's really an authentic or not, unless you send a part and you're saying this is AD 9093 or whatever, we open the device and there's nothing in there, then for sure I can tell you that it is a counterfeit device. But outside of that one, even if the part passes all the testing, I cannot for sure tell you that this part is a counterfeit or not, because not all the tests that we do are not necessarily can 100% verify. There's no way a test lab can do 100% electrical testing for the data sheet and have all the patterns and all the design simulations that the OCMs have. All you can do is the best you can do, provide the best coverage you can, and have some level of confidence. So that's all we're doing, is we're verifying, not authenticating. This just tells you a little bit more about AS6171 standard, what the purpose is. The target audience, obviously, are the independent test facilities who are going to be testing it. So when I say independent test facilities, it means test facilities within the OEMs. If BAE has a test lab, or Honeywell has a test lab, or Lockheed has a test lab, then these guidelines would also be directed. Hopefully they'll be using that also. And independent distributors. One of the concerns that we have is that this document will be taken literally by the distributors, and there's a lot of interpretation. If you go in and talk to 3 different people what a DC testing means, one person will say, oh, it's a curve tracer, and one person will say, gee, it's a static test, you don't need to do dynamic test. And there's a third person, like myself, which says, well, it depends upon the data sheet. So DC testing, if it has a dynamic characteristic, if it has an output to be looked at, if you're looking at VOL, which is a DC characteristic, but to be able to measure a DC characteristic, you have to have a dynamic input. So there's various interpretation, and what we are hoping that this document, along with the certification, will be able to then level the playing field among the various test laboratories and the people who are interpreting these test methodologies. This is the structure of the G19A subcommittee. Dan leads the committee, I co-chair, I support him. We have various groups within the committee. There's an external visual, there's XRRF, there's a radiology group that Dr. Das up here leads. XRRF is, actually radiology is by Banu, and XRRF is by Dr. Das, who is present up here. And there's DCAP, DLID, there's electrical subcommittee that I also participate in, acoustic microscopy, there's miscellaneous packaging and risk criteria, and I think Henry is going to talk about some risk mitigation in his keynote speech. As far as the miscellaneous is concerned, the miscellaneous group is a very high-end group. It's tackling bigger issues, issues like cloning, reverse engineering, that kind of thing. So 95% of the time you don't deal with that, but there are times where some high-level entity deals with that, so they're coming up with some methodologies for that. And these are the various groups that we just talked about. And risk criteria and sampling plan, I'll talk a little bit more about that. That probably will not have as much of a coverage in the first go-around, but it will in the second go-around. These are some of the future testing that will be for Rev 2, SIMS, XPS, AES, IES, those kinds of. One of the reasons that we need advanced technology is because the counterfeiters have our playbook. They know exactly what we're looking for. You know, they come to these conferences or other conferences, and they know what test methodologies that we are developing. And so they are a step ahead of us in many cases, and for us it makes sense to then develop newer detection methodologies, trying to figure out what are they going to be doing next, and see what methodologies we can come up with. And we don't know what they are, but we believe in some of them that will be used in the next generation of testing. Each test methodology section will have processes and description of the procedures, what equipment will be needed, required qualification and certification. And I'll just talk about the qualification and certification up here right now. The intent, the way the document is written right now is that it will require that each lab declare what methodologies they're going to get certified for. Not every lab can do everything. So some labs will do electrical testing, some will do XRF, some will do both of them. And then they have to, idea is they have to get AS17025 certification. So 17025 certification allows you to piecemeal the certification. You could say, gee, the scope of my 17025 is electrical testing. But the scope of my 17025 is XRF. So what it does, it allows various expertise to come in and be able to then demonstrate and have a play in the counterfeit mitigation testing process. And then there is another discussion that is going on is the proficiency test. How do we validate that the lab personnel has the proficiency to do the job? In case of non-destructive testing, there are test methodologies out there, there are certification bodies out there that will certify you for non-destructive testing, but there are not that many test bodies out there that'll certify you for the proficiency of the various methodologies, whether X-ray, XRF, electrical testing. Electrical testing gets very, very difficult because how do you certify a person if the person does he even know how to test an RF device versus memory versus so it's going to be challenged to find a body to be able to do the proficiency test. But that is the intent. That's what we're working on right now. And this basically just talks about the various accreditation requirements that we'll have. The risk, the document and each sub-document provides you guidelines of what testing to do based on risk. So, for example, if it is a device that will be used in home electronics versus in space, then the level of testing changes from low risk to high risk, and the document then defines to say, progressively, this is what you need to do in order to be able to then mitigate the risk and do the verification. The risk subcommittee right now, which I also am a part of, is describing or quantifying how to quantify a component risk, a product risk, a supplier risk, and a supplier risk. So if you buy a product from an independent distributor versus a franchise distributor, the risks are very different, obviously, we know. The product risk is the system that is being used on, how critical the system is. If it is a secondary system or a primary system, then there are some calculations that could be done that tells you what the risk factor should be. And the component risk is the component, is it a secondary component, is it a primary component, does it just measure pressure sensors in a cabin and doesn't do anything to the electronics or to any of the decision-making process? That component has a different risk factor than the one that the CPU that controls the processor, that controls the system. The risk group has worked on defining the various defects that there are and trying now very hard to determine what the various risk factors are depending upon the failure mode. And I got to tell you, I'm not 100% convinced that all of these items up here are counterfeit mitigation risks. Some of them are quality based. You know, it's very hard to tell sometimes whether the part, if you give me a device and I open up the device and I see some failures because of some visual defect, is it because was it there to start with, or did it happen, a delamination, for example, did it happen because it was excessively used, or did it happen because that's what the manufacturing process had? So a lot of these, this was put by University of Connecticut. There's a lot of discussion going on, how many of them apply and how many are really quality risk, and how do we put that into the calculator. And this is just part of our risk mitigation group, some of the tables that we're working on. There's a CDC model also that also this is also part of our risk mitigation discussion. And as I mentioned, it's very low, moderate, high, critical. So each document has these levels of risk. Again, depending upon what the risk level is, defines the level of testing or the amount of testing that needs to get done. Just an example of how the various risk level, in certain cases you will use XRRF, in some cases you will not, depending upon, the cost is an issue also. So it would be, a test lab would be happy to do all the testing for home electronics, charge you, tens of thousands of dollars. Well, is it really worth it or not? I don't think so. The next step is, we are looking at evaluating the looking at the effectiveness, what would the effectiveness of the various testing be, and that's where some of the risk mitigation discussion is happening. We have some empirical data, but we don't have a lot of empirical data, so we're collecting some of that. And the latest status of the AS6171 is as follows. All subgroups have completed initial balloting. There are 7 subgroups, 11 documents have gone through, with the exception of risk mitigation. Risk mitigation is just about completing its document. 2 subgroups have responded to all the comments. So a typical, in a ballot, in an electrical group, there's like 140 comments that we receive. So it's our job to be able to respond to all the comments, go back to the originator who had made the comment, make sure that at least they know how it's being addressed, and then go for reballoting. So currently there are 2 subgroups that have responded to all of them, and they are going through reaffirmation ballot. Electrical subgroup will be the next one that'll go through. So our target was that we would release this document in the 4th quarter. I don't think that'll happen. I think we'll drag it into the 1st quarter of next year. And we're almost there. And that's all I had.